Welcome to the Business of Creativity podcast, the only place where you can chew the fat on working creatively but with 0 calories. I'm Lucy Kikuchi and I'm with my friends dissecting the joys and challenges of pursuing creativity in our work. So whether you work in marketing and comms, design or media production, or whether you work in an entirely different area but vehemently enjoy creativity in your life, join us on this digital adventure. Today's episode is about content writing in marketing and communications. So maybe you're a B2B content marketer that dreams of being a B2C content marketer, or do you wake up at night with the perfect wording for your current copywriting task and reach for your phone to open your notes app? If you fit these descriptions, then this is for you. I work in marketing and spend a lot of time writing. Sometimes I love it and sometimes I would rather chew my own arm off. To dissect this phenomenon with me today is my guest, Richard Berger. Hi, Richard. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you for having me on the show.
That's great. Thank you for joining me. So, Richard, in the spirit of this show, I would like you to introduce yourself by giving me the following information. So I would like to know your favorite book, maybe a quote from that book. And I would also love a quick overview of how creativity and specifically today writing features in your work.
Okay. To pick a single favorite book is quite a challenge for me.
Yeah.
I'm an avid reader, maybe not as voracious as I would like to be, but I have to be reading something or I just go crazy. So a book that I have been spending a lot of time with these last few weeks is a book by Tim Ferriss called Tools of Titans. And you may know that Tim Ferriss has his own podcast, his own kind of interview show, and he's interviewed people from all walks of life, from various industries and all kind of luminaries in their field. And he's in this book, Tools of Titans, he presents kind of the insight from these myriad interviews that he's conducted. And in there, this is there's a quote that I found particularly kind of that resonated with writing anyway. And this was, I don't think this was one of the people he interviewed, but it was a quote that was presented from Neil Gaiman, the writer, from a commencement speech he gave at the University of the Arts. And the quote is, "The moment that you feel that just possibly you're walking down the street naked, exposing too much of your heart and your mind and what exists on the inside, showing too much of yourself, that's the moment you may be starting to get it right."
Okay, very nice. A bit like the expression, I guess, wearing your heart on your sleeve, maybe.
Unfortunately, probably in B2B writing, you don't get too many opportunities to reveal that much of yourself. But It was something that kind of made me stop and go, wow. Which means you have to be honest in whatever it is you do. Now, as for what I do in the work, lately I've been doing quite a bit of translation work. I used to work in public relations for 20 years. I was in charge of global public relations for Canon, the camera and office equipment manufacturer. So I was writing press releases. I was also doing what they call collateral materials. So the booklets and things that would introduce the company and various technologies and things like that. Depending on your point of view, that could be considered very dry writing. But I personally enjoyed the challenge of kind of packaging it and getting the message right. I'm one of those people who, like you, I can find writing, I can either love it or it's the last thing I want to do, if at all possible. So there's definitely kind of a love-hate relationship there. But I also do some video work and animation work, which I shared with you the other day.
Yes, I saw that.
I kind of try to express my creativity in different ways, not just through writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is the reason for this podcast show as well. It's just fun to kind of use the tools and do the different formats. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, what you were saying about kind of writing for work, maybe for B2B marketing or for communications, and also going back to the quote that you mentioned about this idea of sort of sort of getting out, sort of exposing sort of what you are feeling inside and your emotions. And because I think a lot of people enjoy creative writing because it does allow you to you kind of make yourself kind of vulnerable, because you put a lot of stuff out, you put things out there that sort of really sort of dig deep into sort of how you feel about things or your experiences. And so, but at the same time, although it can be a little bit scary when you put these things kind of out there in writing, maybe, at the same time, that's what's great about creativity, and that's what's great about the writing. It's, you sort of get to explore things through that. And then, if you come back to the office and you're writing, maybe B2B content, you don't, it's very difficult to sort of get that kind of creative fulfillment, I suppose. But I still think there is an element of that in my case in B2B sort of content writing. And I think as you grow sort of into the role and into the writing, you can find ways to sort of get away from that dryness and make it kind of more creative. I don't know what you think.
In my case, I think I was well suited for the task, because I'm debating in my head right now whether creativity is the proper word, but I mean, I enjoy the challenge of trying to package the message as concisely and succinctly as possible.
Yeah.
So usually when I was working at Canon and now as well, I'm working from Japanese, and I'm translating from Japanese into English. And if you translate as closely and as literally as possible to the Japanese, you're probably going to lose. It's basically not going to work. I'm now working for a company that does intercultural communication training. And one of the concepts in intercultural communication is the concept of high context and low context. And what that means is Japanese is a very high context culture. So they're not going to be as explicit and make as clear their message as someone from the West, maybe from the United States, and especially the Netherlands is recognized as a very low context culture. Okay. So the Japanese, I was just listening to a podcast the other day of someone who said they have 50 ways of saying no without saying no. And unless you're tuned into that, unless you understand the underlying message, you are not going to understand that they just told you no. Because obviously Japanese, it's well known that they try to avoid conflict. So for example, if you give a proposal, if you make an offer or something, a Japanese person, it's very common for them to say, that's a little bit difficult in Japanese. So if you hear that, you think, okay, well, we just need to kind of rework it. And then we can, where in fact, they're telling you no.
Right.
But they don't want to come out and say no. Or another one, which is even a little more insidious, depending on how you want to interpret it. They said, we will kind of actively consider your proposal. And the last thing they plan to do is consider your proposal. As far as they're concerned, it's over and we're just throwing it away in the trash can.
Yeah.
So that's very high context. So not to say that business writing in Japanese is that level of high context, but still for an English-speaking audience, you need to be very low context. You need to be very clear in the message. So, I take the Japanese original text and I think, how can I massage it? How can I rework it? How can I repackage it to ensure that it's easily understood by a Western audience, by an English-speaking audience? And maybe some of the people who are reading what I'm translating into English are not native English speakers. So I need to take an extra step to ensure that what it is, what I'm trying to convey is done in as low context, as a clear and concise way as possible. So I personally like that challenge. At times it makes me want to pull my hair out, which is why don't have as much hair as I did when I was younger. But I mean, I suppose you could view that as a creative process. It is definitely a challenge, and it's one that I embrace.
Yeah, I think, creative challenges, creative kind of puzzles, really, problem solving, creative problem solving. And I guess also, as part of that process, you must have had, you've got maybe your boss who's Japanese, who's got a certain way of looking at this text, whatever it is that you're writing, and he has his kind of feelings and thoughts on it. And then you're trying to kind of adjust things for the kind of end audience. And I'm sure, because I also worked in Japanese translation a long time ago in Tokyo, this kind of writing process when like multiple people are involved, and it's not so easy just to kind of get down on paper what you want to write. It's there are multiple people in the process, and it's hard to get that final copy out.
Fortunately, I've earned a degree of trust. The people I work with now, they pretty much accept what I submit.
Okay.
With sometimes they'll want to confirm wording. Sometimes they have in-house words or phrases that they use, and it needs to be kind of it needs to follow those guidelines, and I'm happy with that most of the time. There were times at Canon where I was responsible for the CEO's English greetings, and any words that came out of the CEO's mouth in English, I was responsible for. And on rare occasions, someone would say, and this was something that always kind of drove me crazy, but they would say, Japanese people don't know this word in English. And I would say, wait, is this for a Japanese audience? They said, no. It's for Western. I said, okay, well, then there's no problem, because this is the ideal word for this. And they said, yes, but Japanese people don't understand it. And I'm saying, well, why is it necessary for Japanese people to understand it if it's not meant for Japanese? And he said, but wouldn't it be better if Japanese? And I said, well, that's not really. We'd go around in circles, and invariably I'd have to change it to a word that Japanese people understood. So that was, as you can imagine, a pretty frustrating experience.
Yes, I've been in those conversations where the end user of that content will be American or British, and yet you are steered down a path to make it kind of user friendly for Japanese people, and so it all feels a bit at odds. But
Fortunately, I didn't have to deal with that too often, but I have heard horror stories from other native English speakers who are hired to do this, and the people who are making these suggestions or corrections, or sometimes someone who's definitely not qualified to do so, will make changes and then submit it, and then and it's just kind of a mess when it comes out the other end.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so talking about writing then for work, let's tackle maybe bad writing habits. So I'm sure you haven't got any.
No, none whatsoever. I can't help you there.
But think back to your early days. So if I give you an example, procrastination for me, and I think I'm getting past it, and I think I'm getting better, but it's that classic scenario where you've got something that you need to write, and you do everything else to avoid getting started on it. So I would say, procrastination is a bad one for me. But I think I'm getting past that.
Well, I have a 5th degree black belt in procrastination. So I'm quite expert at procrastinating. I like you, I think I've become better at it. Something that has become somewhat of a theme for me in the past few years is basically just making some forward movement, making some progress. So I'll tell myself maybe one line or one paragraph, and just do that today. So rather than have the day end with me doing nothing, I will bargain with myself and say, you don't have to do much, just one paragraph. And then, so I set the goal very, very low.
Yeah, it's true.
And in
though,
doing
isn't it?
so,
Yeah.
I take that first baby step for the day. And then it's like, well, okay, I got one more, and then I'll be finished. Just 2 paragraphs for the day. And that usually is enough to get me started and kind of create some momentum to make some progress. So that's something I just make myself do.
Yeah.
And it's only in the last few years that I think I've kind of latched onto that idea. Just some forward progress, no matter what, just a little bit.
It's so true, isn't it? I think I was the same. Maybe all writers out there have this kind of this stage where they reach that point where, you just, okay, I'm just going to put anything on there. Because you're faced with a blank kind of Word document maybe, and it feels like, it's blank and I don't know what to do. But then if you just allow yourself to write anything, it doesn't have to be perfect sentences. It doesn't have to be beautifully phrased, just any thoughts and ideas. And what I found is, when I come back to it, like maybe the next day, I'm like, oh, look, there's 200 words. And actually, I think they're all right. And then you can sort of start to put the light and shade in, or whatever, however you want to say it. But yeah, I think just kind of allowing yourself to just get anything down, and then often like you maybe come back and maybe you had it in your head, I don't know what to write, and I can't do this, and I'm not sure what to say. And then you come back and you look at it with that kind of feeling of relief, because there's something there. And then you think, actually that's on the right tracks, I think. And then when you've got that kind of confidence, you can go on and hit your word count. So
I've also come up with a technique that I think kind of creates a distraction, but creates the illusion of progress. Mm-hmm. And that is, lately, one of the clients I work for gives me several projects or several documents that need to be translated all at one time, and they're staggered in the deadlines. But I'm usually given like 5 or 6 of these documents that need to be translated in one go. And what I'll do is, I feel kind of overwhelmed when I get these. If I just received one, I could kind of chip away at it, but I get them all at once, and I always feel no matter how many times I kind of repeat the process, I feel a little overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. What I'll do is I'll do a character count with, I guess, since the documents are in Japanese, I count characters instead of words, but maybe 3,000 characters. And so I'll number the documents 1 to 5 or 1 to 6. And then the first document, I'll say, okay, this one has 4,234 characters. This one has 3,000. So I'll kind of see which is the longest and which is the shortest and that sort of thing. And this is just me wasting time, so to speak, but creating the illusion that I'm making progress. And then maybe I'll say, okay, I have time before the last deadline or the first deadline. I'm going to tackle the long one and just knock that one out.
Right.
And so I'll start working on the first one, which may be, 4,000 some odd characters. And then when I start getting a little bit antsy, I'll count how many characters worth of text I finished, and then I'll do a quick mathematical equation. Okay, I'm now 17% done with this first document.
Right.
And then I kind of, say, okay, now I'm 35% done with this document. So I'm kind of gauging my progress and saying, oh, I've come this far. I'm going to make 50%, and then I'm going to take a break. So it's by, I don't know if I'm fooling myself or what I'm doing, but it's this process of just gauging my progress. That kind of drives me forward. So I've come this far. I might as well reach a round number. I'm 36%. Let me hit 40%.
Wow. Yeah.
And then the next time I do it, it's like, oh, actually, I've gone over. It's now 42%. Yeah, I'll go to 50. So
brilliant. But you have to have those little tactics, don't you? That's great. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about good writing habits, or at least these tactics that we have, kind of getting past these kind of psychological problems maybe. But as for good writing habits, which I think you probably maybe get as you get sort of more experienced, but I think for me, one thing I'm learning and getting better at maybe is this. I think maybe what you were talking about, this kind of low context, high context information. Because when I write for sort of marketing, it often gets translated into another language for the company that I work for. And yeah, I sort of would put kind of references that are very maybe UK sort of focused references. I would use idioms that we use here in the UK. And my colleague who looks at this, and she sort of puts it into a different language. She's like, what's that expression, or what's this referring to? And it sort of causes quite a lot of delays, in this whole writing process, which is me writing my part and then it going into, another language and going out in a different language. And to sort of speed things up, keeping this very sort of international feel, sometimes writing with an international perspective, with the international audience in mind, so that it can become much quicker, so that you're not having to stop and speak with your colleague to explain what this idiom means and then try and work that in a different language, or explain this like UK reference. And then she's going to have to take it out because it's not going to be relevant for that audience. But then what does she put in its place? And it becomes quite time consuming. And I think in terms of good writing habits, I'm probably getting a bit better at that now, sort of this international kind of mindset for writing. And also just a typical problem, I think, for all copywriters, B2B writers, is the long sentences. So I think everybody starts out writing very long sentences. And then I think that probably the more experienced you get, the more you realize, you've got to be short, succinct. So I think I wouldn't say that, I've got these great writing habits, but I'm getting there. So.
Well, yeah, experience is an excellent teacher. And you touched on a lot of concepts that are kind of key to intercultural communication. And it's kind of, in a nutshell, it's trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes, trying to view things from the other person's perspective. And idioms and things like that, of course, pose a lot of challenges to non-native English speakers, at least English. And of course, every language has their own idioms, and Japan has no shortage of them either, which is one of the reasons why I have such tremendous admiration for the people who do subtitles for, maybe they do the Japanese subtitles for Western movies or U.S. movies. And sometimes it makes the viewing experience much longer for me, because I'll go on Netflix and I'll watch something and I'll say, wait a minute, how did they handle that in Japanese? And I will go back and I'll turn on the Japanese subtitles and I'll say, okay. So I don't know how much they pay the translators who do the subtitles, but I'm sure they're not paying them enough. Some of the hurdles that they have to, even now, just jumping over hurdles. I mean, that's an idiom right there. Yeah. But just some of the challenges that they have to face and repackage for, native Japanese speaking audiences. I mean, it's just daunting what they have to do sometimes.
Yeah.
And I'm watching a lot of comedy shows by stand-up comedians, English-speaking stand-up comedians. And a lot of what they do is wordplay. And it's just amazing what some of these translators do in the subtitles.
Cool. Yeah. It's such a craft, isn't it? And it requires years of experience. And I don't know if people ever really appreciate that. It's like they speak this language and they speak that language, so they can do it. But I think we know that it's a real craft that needs to be sort of honed over several years, I think. But
I remember I had a Japanese friend. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, which is the South. And the South has their own kind of brand of speaking and also their own sense of humor. And I had I was visiting my mother, who was living in Atlanta at the time. And I had a Japanese friend in town visiting. And one of my mother's friends told a joke. And she said, Richard, can you tell this joke to your Japanese friend? And so she launched into this very involved joke, and I was doing my best to translate. And the punchline was, "If the good Lord's willing and the crick don't rise," which is something, it's a standard phrase in the South. If God is willing and the water in the creek doesn't rise, then, and that's the punchline. And needless to say, I wasn't able to deliver it because it just didn't lend itself to translation into Japanese. So I had to give this very lengthy explanation, and my Japanese friend went, "Ah."
And then they were like,
and it was like,
"I'm not so interested now because that's
Richard,
taking
did you
ages to
translate that
explain."
correctly? She's not laughing.
Yeah, they're looking
Basically,
for the reaction.
the moral of the story is know your audience.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? So true. Okay, well, so let's take a final question then. So thinking about inspiration, like writing inspiration. So maybe inspiration that you get for writing things for work, or just writing inspiration, things that you love to read, people that you think have beautiful writing, where that inspiration comes from. So, for example, for me, I like reading Wired magazine, which I always find really fascinating. It's sort of technology. It's looking at sort of the future of how the world is going to be. And I remember reading this interview about this lady from South Africa who she was a helicopter pilot, and she for a security firm, and basically when cars got hijacked in South Africa, they would have like tracking. The owners had got tracking installed, so she would go after the vehicles with this helicopter. And some of the stories were amazing. I mean, there was one pregnant lady that got taken hostage in this hijacked car, and she was kind of coming down as low as she could get to kind of stop these criminals who had got this car and this lady inside it. And it was just this amazing story. And I just loved the fact that there was just this kind of very ordinary person. We're not talking celebrities. We're not talking famous people, just this ordinary woman for a security firm. And yet she has the most amazing story, these helicopter chases, and it was just fascinating to read, and I just loved that, and I thought, God, I would love to write something about someone who's just an ordinary person, and just like pull things out about them that just really interesting, like bring you a new perspective and teach you something you didn't know. And so I did actually kind of get inspired by that, and did some blogs for work with some of my colleagues, and just try to sort of talking about whatever was the topic in terms of marketing, but sort of pulling out these details of things in their life that you had no clue about. But it was just fascinating to hear their stories. They were from other countries, from other cultures, they spoke different languages, and that was really nice. So I just wondered if you sort of what you kind of consider inspirational sort of writing, what you enjoy reading.
As I mentioned before, I'm an avid reader. I read about 30 to 40 books a year, and I don't know if that's a lot or a few.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
But I maintain a wish list on my Amazon, on Amazon, and there are literally over 200 titles on that wish list.
Right.
And now, because I live in Tokyo and space is limited, I can't buy physical books. Mm-hmm. So I usually buy ebooks for my Kindle. Mm-hmm. And this is, I don't know if this is going to paint me in a good light or a neurotic light, but every day I will check my wish list to see what titles have been, the price has dropped. Because every now and then the titles The titles, they usually can be anywhere from $7.99 to $12.99. But every now and then a title will be $1 or 99 cents or $1.99 or $2.99. So I basically do a word search for the word dropped. And then I just click through and see which titles the price has dropped.
Yeah, so no one's ever stuck for what to buy you for birthday or Christmas then.
An Amazon gift certificate, and I'm happy. So, and the thing is, I now have on my Kindle over 100 books that I have still yet to read.
That feels overwhelming.
There's a word in Japanese called tsundoku, which means basically collecting books that you mean to read and never get around to reading. And so that would apply to me.
Okay, tsundoku.
Tsundoku. And it's a clever play on words because tsunde oku means to kind of pile something up in preparation for something. But if you change the Chinese character used to write doku to read, it's piling up reading.
Yes,
so it's kind of a play on words. It's brilliant, really. It loses something in translation, but I think it's a great word. But that's the case with me. I will read a review somewhere about a book. Someone will recommend a book, and it goes onto my wish list. And I read a mix of fiction and nonfiction. I'm kind of obsessed with something called neuroplasticity, which refers to...
Who isn't?
It's the ability of the brain. It's the ability of the brain to change itself. It's the plasticity of the brain.
Okay.
So I think up to maybe a few decades ago, neuroscientists believed that if you had a stroke or if some part of the brain became damaged, and if that part of the brain maybe was responsible for the function of some part of your body, it was just assumed that you would never recover a function of that part of the body. Neuroplasticity says no, through training, you can regain function. So basically the function that was responsible in a certain part of the brain that maybe became damaged, a different part of the brain can take over that function. So it is possible to regain function that was lost through damage to the brain through a stroke or something like that. And there are a couple of books that I read that I just devoured. It's by an author by the name of Norman. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. It's Dodge or Doige, Doidge. And the first book that I believe he wrote was called The Brain That Changes Itself. And the next way was The Brain's Way of Healing. Fascinating book on just, what you can do. It basically, the idea of if you practice something repeatedly, you're basically developing that function in your brain. And, your brain, because there's a dedicated section that will take over that, and it becomes eventually second nature. I think they said it takes 10,000 hours to attain mastery of something.
Yes,
so people who, practice the piano or some musical instrument, or for us practicing writing, we're developing that part of the brain.
Gosh, when do you get to 10,000 hours? How long is that really? I mean, you're talking years, aren't you? But
so that's something that I find fascinating, and that kind of, maybe due to my not functioning properly brain, I'm maybe through osmosis, I'm hoping I can acquire some of these skills, but that's something that I find fascinating. And also I read so many wonderful authors of fiction and nonfiction as well. And I guess I kind of receive inspiration through reading books that that I find fascinating or entertaining or enlightening.
Yes, yeah. I know it's really great sort of reading sort of a wide selection of different topics, things that you've maybe never even thought of reading. And so I read Elon Musk's biography, and if someone had said to me 20 years ago, okay, you're really going to like this book about a man that makes lots of cars, and I would be like, no, I'm not going to enjoy that. And yet it was, I mean, obviously his life is amazing, but it wasn't, and it was such a page turner because he was, the financial risk that he took on. It was just incredible. But also the writer who wrote this book about him, I just thought it was so well written as well. It was very it was a really good pace, sort of quick pace. And as I said, it was a kind of real page turner. And so I really enjoyed that. But yeah, one of the great things about reading is sort of going off into these topics that maybe you never really knew much about, and then discovering these things that are just fascinating. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
My reading tastes are literally all over the place. I mean, sometimes, some things that I'm not particularly proud of, and I probably wouldn't share with others, but just something that if it received a popular review somewhere or someone raved about it, someone that I respect, then I feel obliged to kind of give it a read and see what it has to offer.
Yeah. So did you say you have about 100 books on your wish list?
Well, no, I have probably 200 books on my wish list, and then more than 100 that are still on my Kindle that have yet to be read. So I have 300 and some odd books to go. So.
And do you have any holiday time coming up so that you can actually read these books? I mean, when do you read? Do you read on the train? Because, I
used to read on the train when I rode the trains. No, I don't ride on the train.
Back in the day.
I've noticed since not the lockdown, but since the pandemic started and I can work from home, I'm reading fewer pages than I used to. But I used to try to get maybe 30 to 40 pages read a day.
Okay.
So now maybe I'm down to 20 or 30 or something. But
yeah,
I'm feeling it because I feel the books piling up that I've yet to read, and I'm not making as much progress as I was in the past. There are worse dilemmas to have,
Yeah, it's a nice dilemma. Yeah, that's a nice dilemma to have. Oh, well, thank you very much for talking to me today about writing inspiration, and books that you love to read. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I have to say a big thank you for you to jump in on this podcast show for the first ever time. It's been so lovely to have someone who just kind of said, yeah, go on then, let's try.
So this is your maiden voyage, maiden podcast.
Is. Yes, exactly.
Well, if it's any consolation, this is my debut into the world of podcasting as well. I've never been on a podcast before, so it was a thrilling experience for me as well.
Yes. Okay. That's brilliant. So we'll wrap it up for today. And then I hope we can speak again. I'm sure we will. We're always liking the same stuff on LinkedIn, aren't we?
Yes,
so, yeah, it's been wonderful. Thanks a lot, Richard. And I'll speak to you again.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
Okay. Bye.